They were the first to supply the then new sanitarium at Wallam Lake with fresh, pasteurized milk. Thomas and Albert eventually turned control of their business over to their nephew, Irving H. Sweet. Irving and his son Liston operated the dairy farm for many years. Unfortunately, Indian Acres Farm eventually went the way of many small farms in New England. When Liston Sweet died suddenly in 1958, the milk business was sold to Monroe Dairy, and the cattle were sold at auction. The houses and land were sold off bit by bit, with the last sale by the family being in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Sweets Hill was unique. It was a nearly self-sufficient mini community producing the goods to meet many of its own needs. The farm and the family who lived on it were, for more than 200 years, an important part of the history of the town of Burrillville.
In 1785, the first dam was built on the Branch River to provide water power for a sawmill and a corn mill in Glendale. In 1853, a stone mill was erected here and woolens were manufactured. In 1880, William Orrell purchased the property and completely rebuilt the mill and manufactured cashmeres and fine woolens. William Quigley worked in the mill and described some of the operations.
And the wool used to come in bags in Glendale, and it would go right to either the dye house or usually the card room, or the picker room rather. From the picker room to the card room, right. And in the cards it come off on what we call roving. That's right. And from roving it went up to the spinning frame straight to
were they mule spinners?
Mule spinning.
Ah, yes.
Mule spinning. And then from there, it was either made into warp yarn or filling yarn. Right. And the dressing room and the weave shop was almost combined together. And then there was another part where there was 50 or 40 looms, I guess. I think there was 53 looms all together. And this part that faced the road, including the card room, the dressing room, and there was 4 mules upstairs.
There were tenements built near the mill. The row of tenements above the mill was called the long block, and the one below the mill were called the short block. The mill owner, William Orrell, lived in this 2.5-story colonial revival house. Around 1905, houses were built for the mill supervisors on the end of Spring Lake Road. Adjacent to these houses stood the Glendale Post Office. It was also a general store. At this intersection stood a water fountain for thirsty horses traveling through the area. In the winter of 1912, you could stand near the top of Glendale Heights for an extensive view of Snake Hill. Route 102 crossed the Branch River into the village of Glendale over this bridge near the railroad station. Later, the station was moved across the river and used as the new post office. Mr. Orrell gave land to build a schoolhouse on what we now call Victory Highway. The school was closed around 1897 and converted into a Catholic church, which is now called the St. Louis Chapel. A new Glendale Grammar School was built on Jocelyn Road. This picture was taken in 1925 when Alice Remington was the teacher there. The school was situated next to the Methodist Church. In 1912, the Methodist Church held a variety show with such contests as apple paring, corn shelling, and nail driving. Back then, Herring Pond, later called Spring Lake, was a popular summer destination. Leo Lee remembers the trolley stop on the Spring Lake Road in Glendale called the Herring Pond Crossing.
Well, they'd come up on a trolley car from one socket, and they would get off at Heron Pond Road at that time, and there was jitneys, you know, Fords, they call them a jitney then.
Yeah.
And then there was a few that had trucks. And they'd get on, and I think it was 10 cents to ride from the railroad tracks up to Spring Lake. And it was packed with people.
During the summer on a Sunday, this was a busy place, with people coming in from other cities and towns. They would get off at Herring Pond Crossing, and jitneys would take them the rest of the distance to the lake. On the lake was a wharf with diving boards, a few slides, and at one time they even had a toboggan. On the beach was Trank Brothers Cafe, an arcade, a merry-go-round, a bathhouse, and several concession stands. It was widely known for its clam cakes and its shore dinner hall. All kinds of boats could be rented. There was a 20-passenger launch called the Idle Hour that took sightseers all around the pond for 10 cents. Ma's ice cream stand began in 1925 and operated for over 50 years. In its early years, the only building here was the hotel. The beach once had pine trees on its shores before the concession stands were built, but through the years they were cut down as the place was developed. Spring Lake Beach is now owned by the town. A $1.14 million reconstruction project began in October 1998. In 1958, Flynn's Beach was a popular swimming place on the Harrisville end of Spring Lake. Near there, an ice house was in operation in the early 1900s until modern refrigeration made the business obsolete. The area in Glendale under Broncos Highway near the mill used to be called the Cove and was a gathering place for children and adults to go ice skating in winter. This picture, taken in 1945, shows Jimmy Ma plowing off the cove so the kids could skate. When the new 102 was built in 1968, the cove ceased to exist. Mr. Levy bought the Glendale Mill in 1934 and tore down the lower part of the building. He put on an addition, which is under construction here, made renovations, and ran it as a weave shop. He tore down 36 mill houses, including those in the long block and the short block. In return, he built an equal number of houses for the mill workers in a housing development called the New Village on the old Stockwell Farm along Route 102. It was considered to be the best example of modern group housing. Bruin Plastics Company now operates in the old Glendale Mill. Hidden in the woods of Glendale on Snake Hill is a quiet sentinel of time. Inside this mighty granite ridge is the Forger's Cave, where legend tells of counterfeiters making silver coins. It has also been known as Cooper's Den and Fox's Cave. In 1946, John Kamazin took over the operation of a restaurant in a small octagon-shaped building in Glendale and called it Johnny's Clam Spa.
In those days, Route 102 from Woonsocket, going south from here, the only way you can get to the Connecticut Turnpike, you had to come through Glendale. And in Glendale, Spring Lake was a favorite beach. And going by here, I checked out the place and it looked pretty good, and I took a chance. The first week I ordered 35 pounds of fish, I sold out. The second week, it doubled, and I finally built it up to close to 400 pounds of fish a week when it was in its prime. Then, I had a good secret recipe on fried clams. That's how Johnny's Clam Spa was known, so well known for a number of years. The place of business only held 44 people. I was selling clams, French fries, from the front window to the back window to the side door. Anybody that shoved me $1 owned it. True.
In 1963, Johnny's Clam Spa expanded by moving to a new location across the river on Victory Highway. It continued to be known throughout the region for its fried clams until Johnny retired in 1980. This area was originally called Eston Mills when water power from the Branch River was used to run a scythe factory. Later, the mill was enlarged to produce woolens. During the Civil War, the mill made enormous profits, producing cloth for the Union Army at a rate of about 3,000 yards a week. In 1898, the Mohegan Worsted Company was purchased by the Wanscott Company. This was a Providence-based corporation that owned and operated the mill until 1954. The dam that once provided water power for the mill has been left to crumble away, and only remnants of it remain. In 1974, it was sold to the Atlas Pallet Company. Just south of the mill on Douglas Pike was the location of the Bartlett Farm. This picture was taken in 1902 when it was run by Fay Bartlett. He raised cattle, horses, and chickens on this 200-acre farm. The barn, which was perhaps the largest in northern Rhode Island, had running water troughs for each cow, something unheard of in the mid-19th century. The barn fell to ruin and was destroyed in the 1970s. The Eston Schoolhouse was one of the oldest schoolhouses in town. It was built almost 200 years ago in 1806 on Ironstone Road. Children at the Eston Schoolhouse once used this slate to practice their lessons. Today, the old school is a private residence. In 1901, a camp was set up in Mohegan during a smallpox epidemic to stop the spread of this dreaded disease. It was called Camp Breeze. If someone in the household came down with smallpox, the mother or father was not allowed to go to work in the mills. Therefore, people in the household afflicted with smallpox were quarantined at this camp. The dividing line between Nasonville and Mohegan was a bridge on Douglas Pike and was once known as Rich Hollow. Nasonville was founded in 1825 by Leonard Nason, who purchased land here when it was a wilderness. Mr. Nason cleared the land, built a dam, and put up a small mill for the manufacture of axes and hoes. By 1850, Nason's hoes and edge tools could be made in large quantities. In fact, he could turn out 1,000 axes a day. Several fires destroyed the axe factory, and it was rebuilt to manufacture casimirs and worsteds, and called the Nasonville Woolen Mill. In 1935, Austin T. Levy bought the Nasonville Mill and continued to manufacture woolens.
I worked in Nasonville Mill for about 10 years, starting in 1942 as a doubler. My job was to take bobbins from the spinning frame and wind them two together onto a tube, which was sent upstairs to be twisted to make two-ply yarn for the weavers.
Today, it is owned by Turex, a plastics manufacturer. At the corner of Douglas Pike and Victory Highway stands the Western Hotel. This old hotel was probably built around the same time as the Providence to Douglas Turnpike, now called Route 7, and served as a tavern for travelers on the pike. Back then, it was known as the Walling Hotel. Through the years, it has been used as a hotel or boarding house under several different owners. Opposite the Westin Hotel was the Nasonville Soda Works. Soda was made here until 1924 by McManus and Mead. A spring up on the hill behind the Westin provided an excellent source of good water for the soda. The area is now a gas station. Arthur Chisholm remembers the company.
And right across from the Westin, which is the Westin Hill Garage, used to be a bottling company. They made all their own soda and bottled all their own liquor and soda and stuff. It was wonderful soda, I think. I thought it was one of the best there was in the country. And they made their own too. They bottled it and everything.
This picture, looking north towards the mill, shows the way Nasonville looked when the Douglas Pike was nothing but a dirt road. This building, located on the corner of Douglas Pike and Victory Highway, was once the Nasonville Schoolhouse and was built around the turn of the century.
We are on the shore of Tarquin Pond in the easternmost section of Burrillville, in the Oak Valley tar kiln area. The name tar kiln came from the fact that during the colonial times there was a kiln here which used to extract the tar from the pine pitch trees. As early as 1810, a cotton mill was here, one of the first in town. About 1815, Oak Valley and tar kiln were the centers of a thriving neighborhood. There were 4 mills, a tannery, a grist and sawmill here, and because of the amount of business, a bank was proposed. Samuel Slater was asked to be the president of it, but he insisted the bank be built in the town named after him, Slatersville. Therefore, Burrillville money was used to build the first bank in this part of Rhode Island.
At the turn of the century, the Oak Valley Mill was under the management of the Nichols family and manufactured woolens. There were about 200 people living in this community then. The last business to operate here was called Rainbow Valley Dye Works. It closed in 1951. Several years later, the mill and tenement houses were destroyed by fire. This was the home of Henry Stafford Nichols, who was superintendent of the mill in the mid-1800s.
Our mills would never have been built without the waterways, and our villages would never have been settled without the mills. Burrillville's rivers, streams, and brooks all contribute to the Blackstone River Valley. We are a valuable part of the history of the American Industrial Revolution.
Let's go back in time and imagine when Main Street was dirt and horses were commonly used to transport people, deliver goods, and haul heavy loads. Imagine the horse pulling a snowplow to clear our roads and sidewalks in winter. Through the years, this animal has served us by pulling the plow and harrow on our farms. They have also graced us with their beauty.
It wasn't like out west, you didn't ride a horse. I heard your grandfather say you was going to the store to be as far as from here to Nasonville store. You'd walk, you'd throw a feed sack over your back and walk. Because he said you wouldn't want to harness that horse up and set, he went so slow you'd freeze to death. You know, and then when you got back with your groceries, he said you had to take that harness off and put the horse away. He said you're better off. He said people just walk. They they walked wherever they went.
William Tinkham was the driving force to build the Pascoag Line in Burrillville and was the founder of the Providence and Springfield Railroad. Water power was insufficient to power his mills, and the wood supply in the area was being depleted. His mills were so far inland that hauling coal by wagon on bad roads was just too slow and too expensive. Tinkham's railroad would begin in Oneyville, entering the town in Tarkiln, and would follow several rivers to reach Harrisville and on to Pascoag. He wanted to revise an old route surveyed in 1856 to bring the airline road through northern Rhode Island. The Great Airline Enterprise was a group of railroad companies linked up to create a direct route from Boston to New York, devised in the 1850s. William Tinkham teamed up with Albert Sales, a mill owner in Pascoag, and in August of 1873, train service began. The train terminated in Pascoag at the base of Cemetery Hill at Depot Square. When the train came in, the engine was disconnected from the cars and moved onto the turntable. Then everybody would pitch in and push it around to head it back to Providence. The new railroad was a great benefit to the region, but as an investment, it was unsuccessful. Two of the largest mills in town closed in 1876, and a spring flood that same year destroyed a mill and 7 dams. In 1878, half of the mills along the line were either closed or ran on an irregular basis. Tinkham's railroad operated independently for 17 years, when in 1890 their line was absorbed by the New York and New England Railroad. The New York and New England Railroad completed the extension from Pascoag to Douglas Junction in 1893. This completed the line from Providence to New York and brought train service to Wallam Lake. On October 18, 1892, an article was printed in the Pascoag Herald describing the railroad line at Wallam Lake. About 4 miles from Pascoag, the road enters the Buck Hill Woods and passes for a distance of about 2 miles along the shores of Wallam Pond. It is here that a view of exceptional attractiveness is afforded. The shores of the pond are lined with a dense growth of pines, which, with the clear sparkling waters of the lake, combine to give an effect of rare beauty. The Woonsocket and Pascoag line was the last line the New York and New England Railroad built to become part of the airline system. It was completed in 1891. This line went through Nasonville, Glendale, Oakland, and Whipple, ending at Harrisville, making Oakland the only village to have 2 train stations. The New York and New England Railroad went bankrupt during the financial panic of 1893 and was reorganized as the New England Railroad Company, and then was purchased by the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad in 1895. In 1905, it became the New Haven. The New Haven had become a rail monopoly, and shipping prices rose sharply. The Southern New England Railway, a Grand Trunk subsidiary, nearly broke the monopoly. Court battles, land purchases, financial difficulties, and the death of the chief executive of the Grand Trunk Railroad, Charles M. Hayes, who was aboard the Titanic, finally caused the Grand Trunk Empire to collapse. Movements to revitalize the Grand Trunk continued through the 20s, but by then, Congress, the courts, and the improving highway system finally broke the monopoly. The Douglas extension was abandoned on September 25, 1937. Some of the reasons include the closing of the Ritchie Quarry and the closing of the Bowen Ice Company. More people were using cars to travel to Wallam Lake, and more trucks were being used to haul freight. The Woonsocket to Pascoag line was paralleled by a trolley constructed in 1902, which drained passengers from the train. When the Depression struck, the line was used between Woonsocket and Glendale only. Beyond Glendale, freight was delivered by truck rather than by rail. This line was officially abandoned on December 10, 1937. The original Pasco line from Providence did a reasonable amount of freight traffic because of the mills. In 1962, the last train left Pasco, taking with it the end of the railroad in the town of Burrillville. In 1900, Italian immigrant laborers provided the manpower to build the trolley line in Burrillville. Here we see them working with pick and shovel on Douglas Pike in Nasonville. While working on the line, they lived in these mud huts in Glendale, near what is now the St. Louis Chapel on Victory Highway. The flag of the Republic of Italy proudly waves over a worker's hut. In 1902, the first trolley car passed through Bridgeton on the newly completed Woonsocket to Pasco line. From North Smithfield, the line followed this compound curve in the Mount Pleasant area. It ran past the Nasonville train station, turning north on Douglas Pike to Mohegan Mill. It then cut through the fields going by the Methodist Church in Glendale before crossing Jocelyn Road. Next, it would stop at the Herring Pond crossing on Spring Lake Road. From there, it went through the woods and came out on Victory Highway just up the hill from